Ben Standig is with us, of course, every Monday and Friday, maybe more than that this week. We'll see what Ben's availability is. What Adam Peters speaks on Wednesday, correct?
No, tomorrow.
Tomorrow late afternoon, I believe it is.
That's correct. You will be off the air.
So tune in to Team 980. I'm sure Chris will carry some of Adam Peters during his show. So Ben had today, he has put out his mock Washington Commanders draft. You should read it by going to The Athletic. You should follow Ben on X, on Twitter, at Ben Standig, and you should listen to his podcast, Last Man Standing. So we won't go through the entire draft, but I think people are interested in what you're thinking at the beginning of this draft. And you have two different trade scenarios. So I'll let you go through each of the two trade scenarios that you think can happen and you'd like to see happen.
Right. I mean, look, when we do these like team-specific mock drafts, you're looking at it purely through the lens of your group. You're not factoring in necessarily what's going to happen around them. This is a draft where a lot of teams would love to trade down. I had one GM from another team tell me the other day that, like, basically once you get past the top 3 picks, you're kind of looking at a lot of second rounders in most years. So this is not a draft where teams are like dying to they're not coveting a lot of the players here, but obviously they're talented. There's talented players. Second round picks are good guys too. So the question always like how many are people? How many positions or players are people going to want to trade up for? And that's where the rub is. We talk about the quarterbacks. I just read a whole bunch of things today online for different insidery stuff from different outlets, and I'm almost more confused than ever about what the quarterback situation is going to look like. So if teams are willing to trade up for a quarterback or maybe an offensive tackle, then trading down can make a lot of sense. So I went with that theory. I had them trading down to 39 from 29 to 39 with the Bears. The Bears have the 10th pick, and then they have 2 in the second round. They are doing everything they can to help Caleb Williams. Like they were very aggressive this offseason in terms of fixing the offensive line. They still need a left tackle. Unless they trade up from 10, they're not getting one. So trading up at 39 to get one, whether that's Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly, probably makes sense. And then Washington picks up what did I have here? An extra sorry, Kevin. An extra third-round pick. I've done so many of these things, I forget what I'm doing. An extra third-round pick. And obviously, I think the thing for Washington is, if we're going to say edge rusher is their top need, which I think is fair, like that's one of the deeper positions in this draft. There'll be like 5 or 6 guys that go round 1, but there's another, possibly 5, 6 guys who go in round 2. And I think they can still get that, a good player there and an extra pick. So that's what I did with having them take Nick Scorton, the defensive end from Texas A&M. I've talked about him.
Yeah, you have.
Kind of from the jump. He may not be there at 38. He may be going late first. He's not really been discussed that way publicly, but every time I talk to people privately, in the league, I get more positive vibes because he is like a relentless player. He doesn't have the same athletic upside that some of the other guys do, but just a relentless attacking the quarterback, getting after the run. He's very mature. He was a 19-year-old team captain at Purdue in 2023, transferred to Texas A&M last year. They had him put on a bunch of weight. His sack numbers declined. He now has shed that weight. He's back to kind of where he was at Purdue, around like 260. And, I think people are big fans of what he can do, but he still may be there at 38 because it is a deep class at defensive end. So that was my thought there at the first pick. Again, whether, can they trade down? We'll see. But I think in the ideal world and somewhat realistically, I think that's what would make the most sense.
Right. Okay. So you also had the scenario in which they end up, not making a trade. And that's another player you've talked about for a while. So just tell everybody, if they don't trade at 29, who you think they'll pick.
Yeah, so I have Donovan Ezeraku, the defensive end from Syracuse, very bendy edge rusher, had you know, 16, 17 sacks last year, tons of tackles for loss. You know, he might be he's a little light. He's only in the 240s, and that may make him a little bit more of like a designated pass rusher to start. But
right.
I know like our guy, Dane Brugler, you know, thinks that his athletic traits show a guy that, you know, is going to be able to morph into, you know, more of a you know, free down player truly over time. And, you know, he's, again, another guy, team captain, you know, constant energy out there on the field. And there's a lot to like. I think the question with him is, you know, I need to know where this defensive end class starts to go off the board. You know, if we hear like if there's like 3 or 4 guys who are going in the top 15, which is conceivable, then, you know, the Jalen Walkers, Mikael Williams, Shamar Stewart, so on, then the defensive end.
Mike Green can't make it to 29. No way.
No. I actually, yeah, I think he's going to teams as well. But like, so if that's the case, then Ezra can get bumped up to like, you know, 19 to the Buccaneers. He's sort of like, you know, when you factor in the upside, he's sort of like one of the last 1 or 2 guys in that. Maybe he's not in the top tier, but like, you know, he's like right there. And then it starts to go into that next tier where guys like Scorton, which is a little lower of a ceiling. But on the other hand, if the edge rushers fall, which is, you know, also possible, that the evaluations for this group are all over the place. Then, you know, then at that point, then he may slip enough to get to 29. And, you know, again, the key with the defensive ends and the defensive tackles, teams may look at it and say, look, we like this player, but we think we can get a pretty good end or tackle in round 2 or 3. So instead, let's take a position that's a little bit thinner, whether that's offensive tackle or cornerback or receiver, and get that guy, and then we'll get that later. So if that happens, then Washington gets that guy. But, you know, ultimately they need whatever the scenario, they've got to come away with more from the edge rusher position. You know, they've got some decent players in Dorrance Armstrong and Dietrich Wise and so on, but, you know, there's almost no upside. The only player under 25 years old is Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the 7th-round pick from last year. So they need to get younger. They need to get more explosive, whether that's in the 1st or 2nd round. I think they've got to make that a priority.
Do you think – I want to come back to the edge rushers in a moment. Do you think they did enough in the offseason so far? And there's still one big swing left, and that would be Trey Hendrickson. He's still out there. There's still a possibility. By the way, what if Cincinnati goes edge in the first round because the best player on their board is an edge? Then there's a chance he could get traded before the 2nd round begins. And maybe at that point they take the 2nd rounder because I think we all kind of feel like the price has been too high. But putting him to the side for a moment, have they done enough to be in position to draft the best player on their board at any position other than the obvious being quarterback?
I think the answer is yes, but that's also factoring in, like, you know, free agency is not over. It's over. Like nobody's signing anybody anymore. And that has a lot to do with like compensatory picks. Guys who get signed after free agency don't count towards that formula. You still have a guy like Darius Smith out there, you know, who had 9 sacks last year for 2 teams. You know, there's a lot of vets out there. If you look at the list of available players, that you're like, whoa, that's kind of there's a lot of guys out there you think could be a starter or rotation.
Well, so, they're players that could be expendable post-draft that could be available, that could be very interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, like, the way I've been saying it is, like, I think they have done enough across the board that if they had to go play week 1 tomorrow, you know, I think they'd be, generally speaking, okay. Like, I mean, you know, some spots, again, could use more, particularly from a long-term perspective. They have so many players on 1-year deals, and then they have obviously some older guys up to Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, where you're like, hey, what's the succession plan? So I think that there's those factors. But in terms of this year, you know, again, in general, I think they have done enough to at least be kind of where they were at last year, and maybe, you know, obviously a little bit better in some cases. You know, needless to say, you know, left tackle, wide receiver, hopefully stopping the run better with Dietrich Wise, Javon Kinlaw. But, you know, at the same point, like, again, in terms of the longer-term build, they need more. So I do think that they could go somewhat, you know, best player available if they wanted at 29 or in the 2nd round. But the edge rusher position is one, like I said, where there just isn't much upside there. They got okay players, and maybe it's better than that, but
yeah,
I just think that's where they need, at least even say a cornerback. The upside is that Marshawn Lattimore is healthy, and that if he's able to return and play at a somewhere Pro Bowl-ish level, well, then that's a huge upgrade over what they had even a year ago. And same thing with Deebo Samuel in terms of recovering from his situation. If he's able to look like a guy we've seen in the past, well, that's a huge deal. But again, he's only on a 1-year deal, so I think it's more for me like the longer term issues or the concern than like 2025.
Do they have a double-digit sack guy on their roster right now?
I don't think so. I was saying your producer was saying he heard John Keim had it on his podcast that came out yesterday. We talked, a bunch of us from the beat were on this episode, and somewhere in there I mentioned, but the one thing this team could do to really help itself is tell Daron Payne you're going to get John Allen after this year if you don't have a big year, so he can think this is like a contract year, and then maybe he goes back to the double-digit sack guy that we saw when he was going into his last year a couple of years ago. Maybe you have to pull a mind trick like that. But other than that, no, I don't see a guy that you would say has double-digit sacks. I mean, Dorrance Armstrong did what he did last year. He had some good sack numbers at Dallas, but that was playing with Micah Parsons. Here, they don't have that. So, no, I don't think they have a guy like that. I mean, maybe Frankie Louvu, but him getting eight sacks is plenty good. They need more than just him.
What did he have last year? He had 8? Because I would say that Louvu's the guy that in year 2, if they've added, some ability to create more down and distance passing situations where they can be even more creative with him, that he could easily be a double-digit sack guy.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a sack is important, but it's not just that play; it's the overall, right? So I'm just saying, for Luke, projecting Louvu as a double-digit sack, I think that's probably just overstating what it really means that they're looking for from out of him. If he gets there, sure. But it's like last year with Fowler. I mean, yeah, he had 10.5 sacks, but I'm not looking at him as some premier pass rusher in the league. They
wouldn't let him go if he was.
right. I mean, he basically got benched in the NFC Championship game because he was limited to what he could do otherwise. So, they need more coming off the edge, and obviously these things trickle down. You have somebody off the edge who commands a double team. Now all of a sudden that frees up other players and so on. So that's the thing. They just don't have enough guys that the other team has to say, oh boy, we really have to watch this player. That's just not happening right now.
Ben's a multi-time mock draft champion. His overall first-round mock will be out on Wednesday at The Athletic.